Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alacia Stainbrook. I am one of the co-directors at Triad, the Autism Institute at the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center. I co-direct along with Pablo Juarez, who is in the audience here today, if you want to give a quick wave. Together, we help oversee a number of programs at Triad that are really focused on service to children and students and families and service providers, educators from birth through transition into adulthood. For today, I'm going to focus in on our early intervention work, specifically the efforts that we've made to build capacity around some of the assessment work that Dr. Warren has already spoken about, but also how to support families and providers after an evaluation for autism. Just a special thanks to our leadership team that you see here. These folks oversee a lot of the efforts that I'll be talking about today and are certainly critical to the work being accomplished. And then the real heroes of the story, these are our early intervention consultants at Triad, who are the ones working directly with families and service providers across our state. So for a little bit of context, in the United States, we have a service called Part C, which is what provides early intervention services to children in every state. Each state has its own organization. Ours is called the Tennessee Early Intervention System, and it's responsible for providing therapy services for children historically under the age of 3, recently up into the age of 5. And that typically looks like a generalized developmental therapy that includes a home provider, a home visitor, checking in on families once a week, a couple times a month to work on goals that are specific to the family. And then they also provide ancillary services like speech therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy as needed. We've had a long-standing relationship with this organization, and it really has been critical to the work that we'll talk about today. Our goal at Triad and across all of our programs is how do we take the things that we know are effective, the tools, the evidence-based practices, and get them into the hands of those who are actually out in the community engaging with families and children on a daily basis. So this partnership has been really critical. Not only do they fund the work that we do with families and service providers, but they also play a role in actually developing what these services are going to look like in implementation and dissemination over time. It's a really strong system, but they face the barriers that all of us face in how do we make sure that there are enough diagnostic resources to go around? How do we get access to autism evaluations for families in a timely manner? And then how do we actually connect families to services that are going to be autism specific and helpful following that evaluation? So I'll talk about 3 tiers to that work today, a little bit more building off of what Dr. Warren has already shared around autism assessment. I'll talk about our caregiver support, and I'll also talk about our capacity building efforts with service providers. So we talked a little bit already about the traditional evaluation that we're all very familiar with that can be lengthy and time commitment for families, can require significant travel. Here's a picture of our state. The V in the middle is where we're located. So for families living in that surrounding area, not too challenging, still facing a lengthy wait list, but for families on the eastern and western edges of our state, it's been a real challenge for families historically to access an evaluation. In 2016, again, building off of what Dr. Warren shared, we started to play around with the idea of what would it look like if we could hire a couple of consultants to live in a different region of the state and actually be there to meet families in a clinic closer to their home while we had a psychologist zooming in or video conferencing in to observe that interaction, observe the evaluation, provide the caregiver interview, and potentially some diagnostic feedback. That went really well for us, and we were actually in the midst of expanding that into the eastern region of the state when the familiar 2020 COVID pandemic hit for us. And as we've mentioned before, we fast forwarded to using the TAP. And that was helpful for us in a number of ways. We were already sort of thinking about this idea of, our telediagnostic consultation model that provided or required a consultant to be physically available was wonderful, but it was difficult to have that kind of person in every region of the state. So this caregiver-mediated model was really a great solution for us. One of the things that I think is really important to our story about sort of implementing and expanding telediagnostic supports in Tennessee is building the capacity of service providers to make the right referrals. So within the early intervention system, Part C, service coordinators, who are typically what you might think of as a case manager, are the ones that are making those referrals. And while the telehealth tools are fantastic, they're not always the best fit for every family and every child, specifically if they are very young, if there are co-occurring medical concerns, if they have a lot of language or mobility challenges. Those are things we might want to have some additional conversations about. Is this the right fit, or should we still see this family in person? So one of the things that we did in the initial rollout was a lot of training of those service coordinators on who is the right fit for telehealth, and is the family really ready for that kind of assessment? Past the referral point, we also wanted to make sure that families felt really supported in that telehealth evaluation. And so one of the therapies that is provided through Part C is developmental therapy. Each family has a developmental therapist, and they often have a pretty strong relationship with that individual. It's typically someone that they have been working with for a long time. They know the family really well. So we were fortunate that Part C was supportive of us engaging directly with those early intervention providers to participate in the evaluation process. So not only do they help prepare families for the evaluation, letting them know what to expect, helping them get set up, they also collect a lot of information for us that is helpful for our psychologists, medical background information, therapy goals, therapy progress, and then they actually, when possible, and it's more frequent than not, they participate in the evaluation itself. And so they're there with the family in the home, or maybe remotely also, and able to help the family answer questions they might be struggling with, provide some additional context to the evaluating psychologist. And then I think most importantly, after the evaluation, they're there to provide ongoing support to the family and answer any follow-up questions that might continue to come up after that evaluation is complete. This is a screenshot of just an online course that we created, a short video that we use to help train providers on how to make the referral, how to help prepare families for the evaluation, and how they can be a helpful member of that evaluation process. We developed a similar tool for caregivers. Sort of the more you know, the better. So we wanted our caregivers to have a glimpse of what they could expect in the evaluation process too. And so this is another short video that we are able to disseminate to families prior to the evaluation. This is just a quick snapshot of the impact of telehealth on our referrals. I think the big takeaway for us is that telehealth has not necessarily been a replacement for in-person traditional evaluations, but it's really helped us to expand access. So while in-person evaluations have sort of leveled out, telehealth evaluations are going up, and overall we just are seeing more kids in general. Shifting gears a little bit, it has been, since day one, really important for us to think about not only how do we increase access to an autism evaluation, but how do we support families after an autism evaluation? In our state, therapies like ABA, NDBIs are available, but they can be difficult for families to access due to wait list or cost of those therapies. And so one of the things our Part C system really wanted us to work on with them was how can we get support and information to families immediately after that evaluation so they're not feeling sort of isolated and stuck finding additional information on their own. So we developed this caregiver and provider support service. We lovingly call it CAPS. And it's a telehealth-based caregiver intervention coaching model. We coach caregivers during daily routines. We use a family-guided routines-based approach, and we partner with the early interventionists in a similar way as to how we partner with them throughout the evaluation process. Ooh. That was a surprise slide, sorry. This just shows a little bit about our growth. I think what's important for me to highlight here is, as with the telehealth evaluation model, this service model started really small. We started very locally, trying to identify what was going to be the most effective service model, what families wanted, what service providers needed, and use that feedback to grow those services over time. So we've been really fortunate over the past 12 plus years at this point that TEIS Part C has continued to expand our funding to provide these services, which means that over time, we have been able to reach a larger number of families and children, and are finally, it took us about 10 years to get there, but are finally statewide in providing that service. That incremental growth was also important because we found that different communities within our state needed something slightly different. And so we needed to take the time to visit those partners and figure out what was going to be most helpful for them. The service model itself has also really shifted over time. When we started in 2014, telehealth was, as Dr. Warren mentioned, not really a thing. And so we were providing a lot of in-person services. We were only providing those ourselves as triad consultants. The length of the service varied a little bit by geography. So if you lived close to us, we could do a little more than if you lived in sort of the outskirts of our area. We were only in Middle Tennessee, and it was only for children referred to an autism evaluation. Now those services are provided completely via telehealth. We engage the early intervention provider, that developmental therapist, in every session, coaching session that we do with the family. And the great thing about that is not only are we able to partner and therefore, I think, deliver a better service to that family because they have more history than we do, but we're building their capacity to continue to support that family after our services are done and all the other families that they may encounter through their service delivery. We are now statewide, and we have expanded services to include not just children who have been referred for an autism evaluation, but maybe children who don't have concerns for autism, but are in need of some specific behavioral support as well. This is kind of what our model looks like. So as I mentioned, our triad consultant works really closely with the developmental therapist in preparing for coaching sessions and delivering coaching sessions and providing feedback to families in between visits. We're focused in on daily routines that are important to the caregiver. We lean on our caregivers really heavily to identify what's going to be most meaningful to them, and then we layer evidence-based practices on top of that. We take a lot of data. I won't bore you with too much of that today, but I think generally the takeaways for us are that caregivers and service providers are really satisfied with the service. They are increasing both their competence and their confidence in either supporting their child or those that they serve. And then we're also seeing reported improvements in child outcomes. Now, this is a really low intensity model, and we acknowledge that, but it is what we like to think of as a jump start to help families get to that next stage. And so we're thrilled to see that we get the outcomes that we do even in that short amount of time. Those outcomes are even more substantial for those families that are living in the more rural and under-resourced regions, which isn't super surprising, but encouraging. And then just a little more data, we do get great feedback on the communication scale, communication and symbolic behavior scale on improvements in child communication across symbolic and social and speech. And then we also get good data on the MacArthur-Bates Developmental Inventory in terms of expressive language growth. And then the last thing I will talk about related to this that sort of brings those three tiers of service together is our capacity building. So as I mentioned, all of these services are in partnership with TEIS, our Part C system. They have service providers across the entire state who are working with these families and have varied backgrounds in autism and behavior challenges. We have some people who have been educators for years and some who are, fresh out of high school or college providing some of these services. And so we built a multi-tiered capacity building model that helps providers access resources where they're at in their sort of learning trajectory. Some of those are open access resources that they can engage with online. We have lots of online courses and modules. We do webinars and lunch and learns. But the things that we have found to be most effective are slightly more intensive and involve things like communities of practice, where we bring a community of 10 to 15 providers together around a certain topic and let them engage with an expert, but also bring their own cases and questions to that scenario. We also do some intensive coaching and consultation with providers across the state that's in an effort to really build local expertise and leadership so that they're not just looking to Vanderbilt for that leadership and expertise, but they have it in their backyard now, and we're starting to see some of that come to fruition. We do have a really large library of online resources that are available to providers and caregivers. And that is substantially helpful to helping us to disseminate as well. One slide that I had that doesn't seem to be showing up, that I'll just kind of backtrack a little bit. When we are working with caregivers on that caregiver coaching model, we did develop 5 curriculum sets to accompany that service. And those really were chosen based on what we found to be the most common asks of families and service providers. So we have a curriculum series focused on communication. We have one focused on behavior, sleep, toilet training, engagement. And those are the tools that we use within our sessions to help coach families and providers, and that they can continue to access after the fact as well. Those are all online and print as well. And then just before I'll close, I'll say a little bit about our reach. We are really fortunate and happy to be able to say that at this point we have engaged in more than 1,500 telehealth evaluations, provided services to over 1,200 families, trained over 800 providers, which I think is the most exciting number because those 800 providers have 20 to 30 children on their caseloads. And we have a lot of people engaging in our online content as well. Just a few lessons learned that I'll share to close out here today. If you build it, they will come. So when we started this program back in 2014, we, as I mentioned, we're very small, and we thought we might see 30 children. Pretty quickly, we realized that that was not going to be enough slots to serve the need. And so that has been obviously an important part of our growth and how we've developed this service over time so that it could be sustainable and expandable. We've had to be really flexible. COVID's a great example, but there are a number of other things that have come up, whether it be regulations from the state, funding from the government that have required us to really shift how we're thinking about this service model and how we're disseminating it. I've already talked about starting slowly and building gradually. And then we have taken advantage of sort of natural opportunities for growth. Some of that has been through research funding that Dr. Warren has brought in. Some of that has been through champions in our community and surrounding coming forward and saying, we want to take on a bigger role in supporting families and disseminating this information. But taking advantage of those opportunities has been huge for us as well. And that is the end for me.